Let's bring in Kathryn Bertine, who's the co-founder of Le Tour Entier and the CEO of the Home Stretch Foundation. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on France Today. What are your overall thoughts on this edition of the Women's Tour de France?
It's a wonderful edition. We are so thrilled to see how the public has taken to it. And we always knew that the athletes had this level of capability. And we've been fighting for this for a long, long time. So it's wonderful to see.
And for people who don't know the history of the women's race, how come this is such a historic edition? It's been compared to 1989. What's that about?
Right. So this is actually the fourth edition of the Tour de France that has the official naming of Tour de France in its title. The first was in 1955. The second set was from 1984 to 1989. And then my pressure group that brought the tour back, or brought the women back to the tour, had La Course by Tour de France, which ran from 2014 to 2021. And now, finally, we have an absolutely amazing stage race, 8 days, Tour de France Femmes. So the history has been there. It's been ASO that's needed a little work in making sure that we can grow this sport properly and this race properly. And we're still pushing for more than 8 days so we can have as many days as the men.
Okay, that's the history. What's the future?
Yeah. The future is to keep shining a light on these women. The future is to have an equal number of race days to the men. And whether that's that the women race 21 or the men come down to 14 and the women move up to 14, there are so many options for equality when we talk about equal exposure for women in this sport. So there's a number of ways we could do this, but I think most of us want 21 days for women, just like we have 21 days for men.
Let me ask you a little bit about the race itself. The winner of both the men's and the women's editions of the Tour de France have been Dutch. In fact, in the women's event, 6 out of the 8 stages, if I'm correct, were won by Dutch cyclists. And when you look at those very steep final stages, it's quite surprising, isn't it, that cyclists from a pretty flat country like the Netherlands should have won. What were your thoughts?
The Dutch have had an incredibly strong presence in cycling. And if you look back at the grassroots, most Dutch racers begin cycling competitively under the age of 10. You know, Marianne Vos was 6 when she first started cycling and racing, not just cycling. So the tradition stems a long history in Dutch cycling. And honestly, that's what we're seeing. Vos is now 35. Van Vleuten is 39, and we're seeing what happens when riders start so young and they continue and progress. And so the Dutch have a really firm handle on starting kids young in cycling.
Okay, and just lastly, your highlights of the whole event.
I think it's truly amazing. You know, we mentioned that the Dutch have a stronghold in cycling, but if you look at the top 10 finishers, we have 7, even 8 different countries that are represented in the top 10, the top 15. So it's showing that cycling is not a niche sport, but rather a global movement. And we're only going to get stronger and better. So for me, seeing the incredible global presence at the Tour de France Femmes is a huge indicator that we have quite a bright future ahead of us in women's cycling.
Okay, Kathryn Bertine, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us here on France 24.
Thank you.